Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar about steps traders need to take to prepare for the digitalisation of international trade, brought to you by the Institute of Export and International Trade in partnership with PDMS. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Institute, and I will be your host for this afternoon. And we hope you agree that this is a webinar of increasing importance to UK traders, what with the government's 2025 border strategy having such a focus on digitalisation, and with Jacob Rees-Mogg's recent claim that import controls on goods entering Britain could be digitalised by the end of 2023. On the next slide, though, you'll see that we have two fantastic speakers today. We'll first hear from our very own Vicky Payne, the Deputy Director of the Institute's Academy. Vicky will be introducing today's topic, setting the scene and presenting some of the findings from the Institute's recent Trade Data and Digitalisation report. Then Chris Gledhill, the CEO of Digital Transformation Specialists, PDMS, will talk in a bit more detail about what digitalisation might practically mean for you, for traders, and he will suggest some practical steps for you to consider in your preparations for it. You can read more about the speakers in the slide pack, which we will be sharing with you after the webinar finishes. On the next slide, though, we're going to begin with a poll to find out a little bit more about you, our audience, and we're going to ask you, what is your level of understanding around concepts like the single trade window and ecosystem of trust? Options ranging from strong understandings to no understanding at all. So we'll give you a few seconds to answer that poll. And while you are answering that, just a couple of housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can contact me with any comments or questions using the question panel on the control window to the right-hand side of your screen. We hope to get to a number of your questions today, though please note that we cannot guarantee we will get to every question in the allocated time. As such, I will be prioritizing questions that have wider relevance to the whole audience. So I won't be going into company or sector-specific queries as such. And a quick note, by the way, that if your questions are short and easy for me to read, I am more likely to read them. Finally, as already mentioned, you will receive access to today's slide pack, as well as a recording of a webinar in a follow-up email we will be sending over the next day or so. So I'll give you just a couple more seconds to answer that poll, and I will then share the results. So thank you everyone for answering, revealing as ever, and really revealing the importance of us running this webinar. So over half of you have no understanding at all of the concepts of single trade window and ecosystem of trust. A third of you say you have a weak understanding, and only about 13% of you have quite a strong or a strong understanding. Vicky, if I can bring you on at this stage, really revealing as ever. What a poll.
Yeah, we were saying before we went into this webinar that we weren't sure what kind of response we'd get, but it's not surprising. Obviously, they're new terminology for traders and anyone involved in international trade, so it is new to people. You will start seeing these terminology bounded about a lot more. So I'd advise now to try and get into communications and updates and things like that regarding the single trade window and ecosystem of trust, because it will become very important and apparent to businesses moving forward. But it is very interesting that 70% 70 to 80% of people obviously have a lack of understanding, but again, it's understandable. It is very new. So yeah, just hopefully webinars such as today will support you going forward with that.
Thanks, Vicky, and thank you everyone for answering and being so honest as well. So yeah, on that note, it's my delight to pass over to Vicky on the next slide to hopefully explain those concepts a little and to talk us through whatever all of this digitalisation lark actually means. So over to you, Vicky.
Thank you. So hi everyone, thank you for joining us today, and it's great to be here. So I'm Vicky Payne, Deputy Director of the Academy at the IOE. Just a little bit of background on myself. So prior to joining the IOE, I spent 13 years working for Jaguar Land Rover Limited, being involved in all aspects of customs compliance, duty management and business preparation for Brexit, but also working in their Centre of Excellence for the customs team. So since joining the IOE in 2019, I've been focusing on delivery of training, education and consultancy around international trade, and more recently supporting the strategy to support businesses and individuals developing their international trade knowledge. So for someone who has worked in industry previously, I understand the restrictions and frustrations that come with documentation when moving goods and services across borders. I can also see the benefits to be gained from digitalisation and understand how important digital transformation within business is. So hopefully this webinar will explain it a little bit more for you. So next slide, please. So what does digitalising trade actually mean? So it does not mean the process of scanning documents, sending PDFs to other businesses or government departments. Digitalisation is the process, digitisation, I need to get this terminology right for you today, is the process of converting information from a physical format into a digital one. Digitalisation goes further than that. So when people say going paperless, it's actually another step beyond that. Digitalisation is the process of leveraging digitisation to improve business processes. So not just sending a PDF, but as an example, uploading data into a platform for multiple users to use and access live information. If digitisation is a conversion of data and processes, digitalisation is a transformation for businesses. So what does it mean? So it's to simplify trade for exporters and reduce barriers that manual documentation creates. So it will minimise regulatory burdens, reduce cost and time, reduce complexity, reduce the risk of fraud, and open up new financing opportunities. It will be designed as a single sign-on portal, so eradicating multiple systems, multiple inputs of data for one shipment. It enables traders to input the data from source and access to real-time information, providing a single version of the truth to simplify trade. Next slide, please. So what's at stake? The Institute of Export and International Trade have actually recently commissioned and launched a report setting out the opportunities and challenges of digitalising trade. The report, Trade, Data and Digitalisation, takes a comprehensive look at the benefits of adopting full digitalisation of trade. It sets out the areas where trade is changing and what will mean for the wider economy. So according to our report, digitalisation can make border processing up to 90% faster and 60% cheaper, increasing exports and return on investment. So a lot can be gained. So if we look at point one, the creation of a complete digital trade ecosystem involving all G7 countries could add at least another 1% to UK GDP. So put simply, in the area of digitalisation of international trade, there is much to be put right, but also much to play for, including enhanced productivity, increased exports, faster economic growth and more jobs. So point two, the International Chamber of Commerce has estimated that digitalising trade documents could create 25 billion in new economic growth by 2024 and free up 224 billion in efficiency savings. So a typical trade transaction involves around 20 entities, 10 to 30 paper documents, over 100 pages. So it shows the gravity of the problem when none of these documents are currently electronic. And it shows where the 224 billion pounds in efficiency savings come from. So point three, digitalising trade will enable firms to overcome barriers to growth by facilitating payments, enabling collaboration between supply chain actors, and reducing the need for investment in fixed assets. So, for example, through the use of cloud-based and other services. Point four, so further use of technology, for example, to track carbon emissions across supply chains at consignment or product level, facilitates the calculation of Scope 3 emissions. This in turn makes accurate carbon labelling more feasible. It would also make it easier to meet the requirements associated with carbon border taxes, were these to be implemented. This also supports the wider supply chain sustainability objectives, as technologies and digitalisation helps to track and monitor the supply chain from start to end of the process. Point five, delays and disruption of the supply of goods, including essentials such as food and medical equipment caused by COVID-19 related restrictions on movement and human-to-human contact, spotlight one of the big vulnerabilities of the current supply chain. So increases in digitalisation, automation and other technologies that reduce reliance on human-to-human contact, reduce such of these vulnerabilities. And point six, the more that the overall supply chain, including brought in goods and services, is integrated, the greater the potential for advances in many areas. Importantly, environmental, social and governance objectives. So this includes opening up financing and insurance opportunities, facilitating pre-border checks and reducing fraud and counterfeiting and enabling traceability as well. So next slide, please. We can see that the main challenges and concerns for businesses following the recent survey. So we've highlighted a few areas here of the concerns for traders. So the first one is data privacy. So a lot of people are asking, is my data private? Who can see the information and can anyone tamper with it? Also around data security, how will the data be kept private? How will it ensure the information is only seen by the exporter and the relevant government departments and not all parties involved in the movement? Other concerns around user liability. So liability will be with the business in either scenario. So even today, the importer or exporter is responsible for the information input onto a customs declaration, even if using an intermediary. But moving forward, there'll be less room for error with one source of information and less inputs. Moving on to traceability. So how can I see if the goods have left and been exported? How will security be affected? So the introduction of tools such as digital seals can reduce and prevent tampering. The identification of goods condition changing can be tracked and flagged, so notifying you of a potential issue with the goods. Then moving on to accessibility. So it's going to be available to all small and large businesses. That's the main aim of this system, to make it available to everyone. And then validation. So this enables government bodies to talk to each other and validate the data and simplify how trade operates. Each business will have their own challenges, so it's important to understand upfront what these are to prepare for the change. This will give competitive advantage, enabling you to move quickly and make changes to processes for supply chain actors where it's required. But I would also say it's important to recognise the needs and benefits of traceability. It's becoming ever more important in today's world, and it presents opportunities such as through the use of custom special procedures. So the risk of error, liability and responsibilities for those errors and confidentiality is crucial to understand. Next slide, please. So the big question is it possible? So it's already happening globally. We never thought a few years back that you'd be able to start your kettle via your phone or shout at your lights to change colour. So the Internet of Things helps to collect various data, and it refers to the connection of devices other than that of computers and smartphones to the Internet. Things as cars, kitchen appliances and heart monitors can be connected through the Internet of Things, so why wouldn't we use this type of technology for international trade? We saw through the UK government's release of the 2025 border strategy that they aspire for the UK border to be the best in the world. So we can look to other successful implementations of single trade windows globally. In New Zealand, for example, single trade window has already realised extensive benefits, including for traders 50% reduction in shippers reporting time, 20 to 50% reduction in compliance cost, and for the government, 50% reduction in time spent on export refunds and removal of process frictions across import and export processes. So there are other examples out there. So obviously at this stage, you can start having a look and researching these other examples as well to see how it is actually fitting in with other countries. During the pandemic, at the height of the pandemic back in 2020, the limiting of human contact really highlighted the relevance of wet signatures and reliance on paper-based trade, such as origin certificates. So the UK government allowed for the first time digital versions of origin certificates to be accepted. So if you just move on next, sorry, to bring up that next point. So we also saw the UK government processing declarations for some goods faster. So medical supplies, personal protective equipment. So it shows the need for digitalisation and all the possibilities of digitalising trade and the openness of government to make this available to everyone. And then just the last point, so it's already beginning in the UK. On the 28th of April this year, the UK government announced they are to cease implementing planned checks on sanitary and phytosanitary goods that were due to be implemented from July 22, saying that they instead want to drive forward the digitalisation strategy through implementing the single trade window and ecosystem of trust programmes. Recent announcements by UK government state there is a new electronic trade documents bill waiting implementation, which will put electronic documents on the same legal basis as their paper equivalents, removing a major hurdle to trade digitalisation. The UK government is working hard on establishing what the business expectation is when it comes to single trade window before they begin work. So they have begun this with their ecosystem of trust programs. Next slide, please. So how might this work? So as you may be aware, depending on the goods you move or the role you play in the supply chain, currently the trader or intermediary acting on the trader's behalf may have several systems to access and input data to register goods before they can move. creating several additional steps into the process, causing additional work and potential delay. With the UK single trade window, this will change the way we interact with government bodies, using a portal as a data input tool to communicate one set of data to all the relevant departments that require the information, creating an ecosystem of trust. So an ecosystem of trust or trade corridor is essential for business to see. You'll be able to see any interruptions in the supply chain. So it's essentially showing a trusted movement of goods in the trade corridor. So next slide, please. So in regards to government, we've made 9 recommendations through our trade data and digitalisation report to government on how to approach digitalisation. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of points, but I'm not going to talk through them all due to time. But a couple of them are developing a fully integrated market-focused national digitalisation plan in close coordination with business, maximise multi-level business trade support across all needed areas, including through increased awareness, so training, skills development, technical assistance, and improved information delivery. Also foster information exchange, including by using forums to work effectively with each others and also with private sector providers and other stakeholders. So if you are contacted for your thoughts or being asked to do a survey as an example, that information will be fed back to support this development. And next slide, please. Or next, sorry, piece, please. Thank you. So for businesses, recommended steps. So everyone wants to know how they can be prepared. So become fully informed on relevant dimensions of digitalisation, including the laws and regulations and technologies. Join trade bodies, have conversations with other businesses, because everyone's got an aligned interest to exchange information there. IOE have been instrumental in gaining insight into industry views on behalf of the government. We'll inform our members with the latest changes and updates as and when they are available. Seek out training, skills development and technical assistance required for your business. So within the IOE, we offer training, consultancy and education in all areas of international trade. Our business members also have access to free international trade helpline, which supports with technical questions, including digitalisation and the impacts. And also ensure company strategy level discussions and priorities are set to take advantage of and benefit from digitalisation. So ensure you're having those conversations internally with the wider business and ensure that their knowledge is as up to date as possible. So if businesses are prepared, they can be seen as trusted by acting compliantly and legally. There will be advantages and goods will move more freely. So that's the message overall. So I'll pass back to Will. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, as ever, really interesting overview there of kind of some of the main findings from that, particularly the research from the Institute did into digitalisation, and we just posted a link to that report in the chat. I'm just going to launch our second poll for today, and this is asking you what you think the single most important benefit of trade digitalisation will be for your business. The options are speed and efficiency, reduced carbon footprint, reduction of trade complexity, supply chain visibility, and there's another option as well. There's some difficult words to say today, so yeah, sympathies with our speakers. But Vicky, while people are answering that poll, just a couple of questions. Thank you everyone for the questions coming in so far. The first one from Virginia, which I think is a really good question, is kind of putting this into practice. So Virginia says her company is a brewery who currently exports to the EU and further afield. How could digitalisation improve Virginia's export experience?
Okay, so in general, overall, the first elements will be an increase, as we said, in visibility of the movement, the speed of movement, and obviously the lack of multiple inputs of information, and obviously control over the whole movement and data. So it's all a benefit for a business. But as a business, I think you need to look at it on a wider scale as well. It's worth establishing short-term, long-term saving goals and having a look at what that will bring from digitalisation. So initially, it's the initial cost to the business that is always at the forefront of everyone's mind. But in the long term, it will be an additional savings, whether that be time or cost. So it's also about improving quality as well, quality and visibility throughout the supply chain with data. So again, you want to have a look at it from what does digital transformation mean to your company? You need to sit down and have a look what that impact is. Look at the capabilities as well. How do you achieve it? Speak to the wider business, raise the awareness, get buy-in, and ensure you've got a roadmap and the right skills in place to ensure it can be implemented with the least disruption.
Thanks, Vicky. And yeah, I suppose it's different for every company. It's an important takeaway from that. I had another question in from Samantha. Again, it's a goodie. Regarding that digitalization of import checks in 2023, she asked just how feasible actually is that? Can you see it actually happening?
It will happen. Whether it is finalised by then, obviously that's to be seen. Obviously, we were in a situation not long back where we had pandemics and all sorts happening around the world. So there may be impacts to the date, but obviously that we need to aim for a certain date. So obviously just that preparation with a business. But I mean, there's going to be steps put into place when leading up to it, and it's reliant on the Electronic Trade Documents Bill, which will then set the legalities around what actions need to be taken. So the main thing to do for businesses, whilst the legal frameworks are being defined, is to keep up to date with updates, as I say, and be ready to change processes moving forward. Have a look at your whole supply chain, make sure your contracts are up to date. This will enable you to be more flexible then and move forward and as fully digital and be ready for business digital transformation when it comes.
Thanks, Vicky, and I hope everyone has found that useful. I'm going to quickly share the results of that poll. Vicky will be back later for the Q&A, so looking forward to hearing a bit more from you shortly. But really revealing again, so 53% of you saying speed and efficiency, 28% of you a reduction of trade complexity, 12% of you supply chain visibility, and then the other options relatively small. Mean at this point, it's my delight to welcome Chris Gledhill, the Chief Executive of PDMS, onto the stage. PDMS, by the way, being a technology company specializing in digital transformation. So it really is great to have an IT specialist here to talk us through the practicalities of digitalization. But before we go to your slides, Chris, what are your thoughts on that poll? Surprising at all?
No, I think it's quite reassuring actually, because I think the speed and efficiency is one side of the kind of reduction in trade complexity. So depending on which angle you're looking at it from, they're really two parts of the same process, which is reducing complexity, either actually reducing the complexity of the processes or simply making them easier to do through automation, which I guess is what this is, quite a lot of this is about. That creates that speed and efficiency. So they are very definitely two sides of the same coin.
Thanks, Chris. And once again, thank you everyone for answering. But I'm going to hide that poll result. And if we go to the next slide, it's my delight to hand over to you, Chris. So over to you.
Thank you, thank you, Will, and thanks, Vicky, as well. You set me up extremely well by making the big picture case for digitizing or digitalizing trade in practice. And we had a discussion when we were preparing for this about whether it's digitizing or digitalizing, and I kind of enjoyed the subtle distinction between the two, because I guess in 30 odd years in software engineering, which is what we used to call digital transformation, then we've kind of done both. And I think our first, as an organisation, looking back over our history, the first foray we had into this was a project we did with the NHS digital, no, sorry, it wasn't called digital, with the Digital Supplies Agency back in the mid 1990s, where we took them from paper-based catalogues to CD-ROM-based catalogues, and in the process digitized a huge amount of information and massively reduced the simple practical costs of moving vast amounts of paper around, and in the process structured some data, made it complete, and made it a great deal more timely. And I think those three items, those three elements, are still really the key aspects of that are required in order to gain the benefits of digital technology in terms of productivity. And that's ultimately, I think, what this is about. It's about being able to do things more quickly, more cheaply, more simply, ideally, and in a timely manner. So if I can perhaps have the next slide. So the why, the what, and the when. Vicky's kind of stolen my thunder on the first one. I mean, because the whole point, the why, is ultimately, to make businesses involved in import, export, and associated logistics and so on, make their lives easier, make what they do simpler and more profitable. And essentially, in this case, it's largely through the automation of information flows. And that automation is a two-stage process. There are multiplying, there are a lot of participants in this, depending on who you're exporting or importing to and from, and what kind of goods, what kind of regulatory structures there are around them. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what it is you're doing, it's always an information flow. And it nearly always is a combination of having the right data available and also it being available and provided at the right time. Even the simplest, from what we've seen, even the simplest examples, and I have a kind of worked example around the Northern Ireland Protocol, which I'll come to in this presentation in a moment. But the combination of information, but also the need for that to be provided at the right time throughout a process, those things all make a difference to how effectively we are able to trade. So the what, in order to do any of these things, we need structured and complete data, and we need timely communications. And in order to do that, we need to, this is a very much a get our own house in order thing to some extent, but it's also about how we interact with government consultations. You know, the questions that were being asked just now by Will around the feasibility of doing certain things when ministers say they can be done by. Some of that's about what government does, but some of it's also about how effectively the trade associations and traders and individual companies have prepared for what's coming down the road. And I think, which comes to the final point there, which is my as soon as possible point, when should people be preparing for this? And the simple answer is now. It's because some of this is about taking initiative and making sure that the consultations that have been going on around the single trade window, and I know a lot of people in the initial polls indicated they have not necessarily engaged with that, but government have been trying to engage with industry for a little while now around the concept. And I think sometimes it's easy to send back and say, well, I'm not going to engage with this because it might be complicated or it might involve me in some costs, until they've decided what they want to do. And I think in this case, that's a real mistake, because I think the process of making, of having more structured, more complete data is going to be essential, whatever happens. The information that you have about your own products or your own logistics and supply chain, about the regulations you already have to comply with, whether it's certificates of origin or whatever it is, and the financial information that's required for timely payment of duties for releasing things from ports, etc., etc. All of that information and all those use cases are already there, and really the process of digitalisation or digitalisation is only going to be about making that information flow better. It's not necessarily, or it's highly unlikely actually, of itself to mean that there's any new data required. It's mostly about how to make it flow better. So if we move on to the next slide, here are just some thoughts really based on long history really of trying to help organisations of a great many different sorts just be more productive in their administrative processes, which is an awful lot of what we do as a business IT company, and a lot of the real value actually of automation is embedded in this. And the first point is to be in control of your own information and have a single source of the truth. We can all look at our own businesses, and we'd be no different. And there are some things we don't really do as effectively or as efficiently as we should. And it's not necessarily top priority to get all our time records on the same platform and have them on the end at once, or whatever it happens to be that we do. But actually, being in control of your own information, knowing where the correct and single source of the truth is, making sure it's accessible from everywhere in real time. In other words, not stuck in a filing cabinet somewhere in an office somewhere different. That's an incredibly important thing to do anyway. And it's not something, and it's a great way to prepare for digitalisation, but it's a great thing to do in any case. And I think a lot of these things are like that. The second point, I think, is more specifically about what we're talking about here, which is the documentation of the workflows associated with each trade use case. And I've used the term use case here, which is a bit of an IT term, really, but essentially, if for every good that we import or export, it's likely that, you know, to a particular place or through a particular supply chain, then there are going to be a set of things that we have to do, you know, and document and provide for that. And if we have a clear documentation of what information flows to whom and when and in what order, then that is a template for automation. And so being able to do that is also going to be ultimately what governments in different places will be trying to emulate in terms of the kind of systems that they provide to receive that data. So there are two parties always in these kind of information flows. And if you're very clear about what is required by your counterparties and when, it's much more likely that you'll be able to interact with what they think they need to build in terms of web portals or APIs or whatever. And the final point really is about the identifying process inefficiencies and rooting them out. And these are probably seem very obvious, but then ask yourself how many of these have you really dealt with in your organization? So do you ever rekey data that you've got in one system onto a piece of paper or into another system or into somebody else's web portal? You know, rekeying is essentially a waste of time, and it's a boring thing to do, and it creates errors. So there are lots of reasons why cost, you know, the meaningful work aspect of it, and the creation of unintentional errors and inefficiencies. If you're doing it, try and find a way not to, or at least be aware of where it happens, because those are bottlenecks in your process. Paper-based processes or records. I think Vicky said right early on in her presentation that this isn't about going paperless. And of course, she's right, it's more than that. But what paper is not, paper is useful. You know, sometimes printing something onto a piece of paper allows you to do something that's actually easier and cheaper than any other way of doing it. The thing to look out for here, though, is that paper should never be the source of the truth. Paper is essentially a kind of screen. You know, if you don't want people to be wandering around with iPads in a particular environment, that's fine. But the pieces of paper that you use to put a barcode on or whatever else should not be a fundamental part of the process. It's just the screen that's being used to allow somebody or something to process that information in the moment. You should be able to throw it away, recycle it ideally straight away. And the other 2 points are kind of related, but if you know there are information bottlenecks or delays in the processes that you currently have to engage with, either your own or at a particular port or whatever else, then make sure you've got those absolutely nailed down. You know what they are, you know what's causing them, so that you can either deal with it yourself or lobby for those problems to be dealt with as governments. And it's not just going to be the UK government, as governments and government agencies and suppliers and so on all strive to play their part in a digitalised trade environment. And similarly, and it's kind of the same point really, I guess, common errors and mistakes. If you know certain things go wrong regularly and it creates problems for you, then make sure you identify and categorize those problems so that you can see when they're systematic and when they're kind of random. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. Okay, the next couple of, this slide really is a worked example almost. We've got, and it's quite interesting because with Brexit, we suddenly had to contend with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And what that did is it introduced quite suddenly a whole set of administrative requirements and compliance requirements into what had been a completely internal trade route within the United Kingdom. So for the Northern Ireland Protocol, then there is a requirement now for a series of documentation, and there are a lot of, I've learned there are an awful lot of acronyms in trade, almost as many as there are in IT. So, but there is the process of sending something to Northern Ireland is essentially one where you start with an entry summary declaration, which is a document that that has to be provided by the logistics provider normally before something can be embarked. Then there is a fairly automated process of creating a simplified frontier declaration, an SFD, and ultimately, sometime later, a whole lot of additional information at goods line level has to be provided in a supplementary declaration. And all that information was suddenly had to be typed in somewhere or provided somewhere. And the first thing that happened there was that the government provided something called TSS, and TSS is in the first instance a web portal where information about consignments being sent to Northern Ireland could be entered online. That had to be typed in to an online form, but that would then produce the ENS, and then fairly shortly afterwards the SFD, and then created at a subsequent date, and you couldn't enter the information up front, but additional information around the supplementary declarations relating to particular goods lines to be provided at a later date. And and in the first instance, there was a grace period for that. Now we were contacted by Sealy, one of our customers, and we have on our website, we have the project we did with Sealy as a case study, so it's not confidential in any sense. But they discovered that they were effectively have full-time people involved in a completely new administrative process just to do what they've been doing for years, sending goods containers almost on a daily basis to Northern Ireland. And we worked with them on that to try and understand the problem, but then to automate it. And we built essentially the jigsaw piece on the right there was essentially a way to automate all of the data flows by taking data in CSV format, in a sort of spreadsheet format, effectively from their existing systems, which they could already do, and then automating the process of putting that through TSS. And there are two parts to that. The first bit is getting all of the data into the trader tab system, and then providing those bits of it that are required at each stage in the process, so that not only do you not have to put the data in once, but you also don't have to go back to the system at a later date when the supplementary declaration is opened up, the point at which you've declared that the goods will be in Northern Ireland. So there are three in my slide here. There are three columns. There's the process of trade. There's the logistics associated with that, and then there are the data flows associated with that logistics. And to me, that's a very simple case of something which people recognize the cost of because they did not have to do it before, whilst they already had the established trade. So if we move on to the next slide. So what I'm really looking at here is the fact that having had that simple example with the Northern Ireland Protocol, what you realise is that the single trade window concept, which was being talked about, is really just many versions of what we've done with the NI protocol. The difference, and in this slide, what I'm just trying to highlight is the fact that what we've effectively done in the case of the TSS is we've created a digital agent that knows how to interact with that, provided it's given the data up front. And in a lot of the other cases, and I think the way that this will evolve is that each trade use case, which is probably a combination of a type of good and supply chain and a particular market or trade deal, will have really quite similar set of processes and set of counterparties with information flows for compliance and audit and so on that need to go through. But that if provided one can marshal the data up front and understand the workflow, then it's a relatively easy thing to automate that process. And it's also very much easier then to lobby government and participate in the development of an effective set of tools on the other side In other words, the tools that receive the data and things like the single trade window that was, or the TSS scheme, which was put in place very quickly, actually, to try and overcome some of the difficulties of the non-aligned protocol. And I think that really is all I wanted to say from the point of view of slides. Obviously, I think, or hopefully, we've got some questions, and hopefully, what I've said will have answered at least some of them.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Absolutely fantastic. Really, really interesting as well to see the link you made between the kind of the creation of those new processes around TSS and the future single trade window, realizing, I guess, that what can sound quite a theoretical topic is actually already in the process of happening in some regard. But as you say, we're going to move on to questions. Before we do, I'm just going to launch one last question for you, our audience. And this is asking what you think the most significant challenge is for your business when it comes to digitalization. The options are data privacy, security, IT skills and implementation, cost, managing partners. Chris, while people are answering that poll, I'd like to ask a question similar to that which I asked to Vicky earlier, and you did touch on it, but it's around feasibility. As noted, you've shown how TSS was stood up, but the government has got some pretty ambitious timelines in terms of delivering digitalised import checks for single trade window and the wider border strategy. What do people in the IT profession kind of think of these ambitions? Is it blue sky thinking or is it actually doable?
It's been both, isn't it? I mean, with my engineer's hat on, I would say, yeah, of course it's doable. You know, it's you need that. There is a process. But it's a well understood process. I suspect that the kind of workflows, the use cases, as I called them in my presentation, are already probably quite well known. And provided we don't try and gold plate it, if we take a sort of a practical minimum viable product style approach to it, as a lean approach to it, then I think it should be possible to move very quickly to start providing some services, and then for business to respond to that and to innovate around those, and very quickly build up a set of the sort of jigsaw pieces, if you like, the links and channels that allow information to flow in an automated way, and to sort of orchestrate that around lots of different trade scenarios. I think it's important to recognise that there isn't that if we overcomplicate this and try and do everything at once, we may find it a lot more difficult than if we take a really practical and pragmatic approach to just solving one problem at a time and prioritizing the things which are going to have the biggest impact for the industry and for the wider economy.
Thanks, Chris. It's a huge task, but yeah, lots of parties involved and lots of information to get right, I suppose. I'm going to share the results of the poll. It's really interesting. So 40% of you saying IT skills and implementation is it's the biggest challenge. Just under a quarter of you saying managing partners, 17% of you cost, and just under 20% are saying either data privacy or security. So thank you everyone for answering that. I'm conscious of time because I think this was billed as a 45-minute webinar, but I want to get some questions over. And I also want to give everyone the chance to say if they'd like to be contacted by today's speakers with any more information about digitalisation and trade. So I'm going to leave that poll open for just a couple of minutes as I start to go into the questions. But yeah, really great opportunity. Hopefully you've seen from the presentation, PDMS have got some real expertise in terms of the actual practicalities of digitalisation, and obviously there may be a lot of you on here who need help and need more clarity about what it all means for your business and how PDMS can certainly help. So I'll leave that open for a couple of minutes. Vicky, if I can start with a question for you. It's come from Ronnie, and he's asked, does digitalisation mean the end of paper, MRNs, GMRs, transit docs, CMRs, so on, having to be carried by the driver for the exports?
Yeah, I mean, just referring to what Chris was saying, is I can't see it kind of being a right 11 o'clock on this night, everything's going to switch over. So it is going to be a step by step approach to everything. So the main aim is to reduce paper documents in line with the technology that can support it. So all documentation will become digital. Hopefully, if nothing goes wrong, but hopefully even the documentation that has to be carried. There's going to be obviously different documentation required for different countries as well, that potentially you still might need to take with you and with the goods, depending on the products. But again, it's all about that keeping up to date with the staged approach. If it comes in as a staged approach like that, as we did with Brexit with the easements, just keep in touch with webinars and situations like that, up to date with the government guidelines, and just see what steps you need to take. Again, it's taking that next step back as well and looking at the wider supply chain, see who's involved, who are the actors actually involved with getting your goods from A to B, or it might be A to Z with loads of multiple stops in between. But see what's required today, and map all your processes out, and just see where this is going to help, and also where you can prepare.
And Vicky, just to kind of follow up on a question, presumably it's in theory pretty possible for a driver just to turn up with all the information through a QR code or something like that, but that's got to be the aim, hasn't it?
Exactly that, yeah. I mean, like you say, why would you need a piece of paper, physical piece of paper, when you could have it in a cloud somewhere with all the data, where you've got, there's no possibility then of somebody losing the document. I mean, most people on the call may have had that situation where the driver's stuck at the port because he's lost his paperwork, or they've changed the cab and the driver over, carnets going missing, things like that. So all around, as we said, cost, time, effort, everything that goes into it. If we could do, as you say, something as simple as a QR code on a phone or a tablet that lets the goods go through because it's got all the information there, would be obviously the ideal world for everyone, I think.
Absolutely. You'll see in the next slide, by the way, that we're on a Q&A, so it's just I have a nice picture of Vicky and Chris. Lovely stuff. So Chris, I've got a question for you from Catherine. It seems right up your alley, to be honest, from what we were saying before the webinar. She asked, how will the complexities and costs of changes in software and software interchanges be supported for businesses?
That's an interesting question. There are two parts to that, aren't there? There's how are they going to be met, and then is there going to be any support? It's implied that there might be support from government, or in order to enable people to make a transition. And I probably can't answer the second part of that question because that's not my department, as it were. But the other side of it, though, is that the process of automation that we're talking about is almost certainly going to be justified simply through the savings in costs and the increase in competitiveness and productivity that it generates. Just to look at, again, because it's public domain, the case study I used around Sealy and the Northern Ireland Protocol, that one piece of automation for them reduced their, essentially allowed 4 people, full-time people, to change into 1 hour a day. So it's an enormous saving at the time when one of the other big constraints on businesses is labour market. So there is more to this than just, and it's important, and I think I tried to make the case that it's not about, it's not always easy to see what costs you're already incurring through the status quo. And I think that's an important part of the journey businesses need to make, is to really understand how better they could deploy often quite experienced and capable people if they didn't have to do these rather mundane tasks.
I mean, we had a question from Karen who was asking, how much do you think all of this will cost to set up? And that, I guess, that strikes to the heart of the question, isn't it? It's an investment. Companies have to view this as an investment in something which is going to happen. Is that the right reading?
That's pretty much what I'm saying, I think. There are some things you can't do anything about. And and some things, and actually I would regard this as a major opportunity for businesses to the fact that government's going to do its part. And this is an important point, I think. If government's going to do its own investment in being an effective digital counterparty, then that's already quite a significant contribution to this process. And so I think the really important thing for you as an institute and for individual businesses is to make sure they do that as well and as appropriately as possible, so that it's as easy as it can be for us as industry to interact with the services they invest in themselves.
Great, thanks, Chris. We've had a few people asking about well, making a point about we're talking a lot about UK government policy, and obviously we've had different portals in different countries, presumably. So a question from Lucy asks, looking to the future, will different countries be using different software programs? Will these speak to each other? Do we need standardization worldwide? Chris, if I put that to you first, I mean, that's got to be right at the heart of this, standardization.
Absolutely. And it's about information standards primarily. It's not, I wouldn't worry too much about software. Yeah, software is written to comply with standards if those standards exist. The problem arises when there are no standards, and ultimately the standards are already there. They may just not be articulated as such. The information you need to provide in order to do a particular trade route, if you like, is already defined somewhere. I think yes, there will be a lot of standardization that happens. I mean, I think and trade deals or new trading arrangements at the national level will also be associated with information standards and so on. So I think the real key there is about it does come down to structured, timely data and compliance with standards wherever possible. Software will be written to receive information in a standardized way. So provided the information in your system is in the right format, it doesn't really matter what software is being used at the other end.
And Vicky, I know, I think you've, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know we've got lots of people working on digitalization in the company, but ICC and WTO have come out with a new standards digital framework, haven't they? Could you say a little bit more about what that is and why that could be important?
Yeah, so obviously they're looking at it from a wider perspective, as you say. They're looking at it, it's not just UK government level, it is going back to WTO, WCO. So it's a global thing. It's not a UK initiative. It's not the government want us to do this now, which obviously some businesses do feel that way sometimes when we do speak to businesses. But it is as a wider standardising rules and policies internationally. So it is a global thing that they're looking at the moment. So again, when businesses want to do their research on looking into single trade windows and the initiative that the WTO and WCO are coming up with, then again we can either direct you and help you and help you interpret that, or obviously do your research and you can have some bedtime reading if that interests you.
Research, I think, will be key. Another question for you, Vicky, is from Sylvan, who asks, what will the impact of digitalization be on the UK customs broker or intermediary sector?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, obviously we've talked about one source of data going in and one inputter of that information, which in most instances for businesses you do use a broker or an intermediary to support you with, especially with that knowledge that they have for inputting customs declarations. But just referring back to the presentation, digitalisation will enable more speed, less errors, more accountability, but it's visibility of goods movements and efficiency savings. There's all sorts of good stuff there. But Majesty's government are actually developing it with the brokers. So they're including that information as well from brokers and intermediaries. So they're having those conversations as well. So that they're not kind of being left to the side or anything like that. They are including them and seeing what their struggles are and hopefully improving that service as well. So the effect will be to design something that encourages easier, more user-friendly trade, but it's for all businesses, all traders.
Thanks, Vicky. We are slightly running over because this was 45 minutes and our webinars are often an hour, but as long as Vicky and Chris can continue, I'll try to ask a few more questions. A good one from, which I've just lost, from Anna Karin, was about CDS and kind of what CDS's role is within all of this. Obviously, it's coming in and replacing Chief very shortly for import declarations and export declarations. Vicky, is CDS part of this?
Again, it's one of these additional systems we input. As you say, we've got things like DEFRA and DERA and getting your origin certificates and your customs declaration is all part of that. So it's another input system. So it will be all connected in the background. So you'll be able to make your declaration and also get a license and also get a certificate. So obviously this is wider picture, but we're looking at it as a one-stop shop. Don't get that confused with the VAT element, but a one-stop shop for your trade movement. So
So
it will
that
all be interlinked, but obviously that's the first hurdle. Get over CDS first, and then obviously move forward with the plans for digitalisation.
so that would be the single trade window would eventually take in all the data and put it into all the other things like CDS, and then I guess therefore it'd be iPaths and all that sort of stuff. It'd be one
Exactly.
entry into the single trade window.
Yeah.
Okay, but yeah, as you say, Vicky, get over CDS first. That's coming up quite shortly. We've got a webinar on that next, well, not next month, August. So keep your eyes out for that. Can't speak. Um, Chris, we've got a question from Anchor, who's talking about wet signatures and stamps. So I think you said earlier that a piece of paper is just a screen showing information. And she asked, does this also cover wet signatures and stamps? And I guess at the heart of this question is trade has still had wet signatures required for until very recently, and in some cases still does. That's got to be the big hurdle, hasn't it?
It is a big hurdle, and it's ultimately a regulatory hurdle. I mean, that's in the gift of government, isn't it? Yeah, the requirement, and this applies in all sorts of different areas as well, like conveyancing or all sorts of other areas where people are desperately trying to move to a digital only way of doing things, but there are lots of little bits of legal legal niceties sometimes where people still require wet signatures. I haven't managed to remove that from the regulation. Again, it's up to us to identify those bottlenecks. That comes into the category of things I was talking about, where you need to spot it, write it down, and lobby to get it removed, because otherwise people might not read. The people who are doing the single trade window may not know all those nuances. So it's all about making sure that they're picked up and included in the process.
Thank you, Chris. And I'll do one last question, just picking up on something which was asked quite early on, actually, from David. It's a bit of a clarification. What do we mean by digital seal? And that's something I want to ask as well. So I don't know whether Chris, I think Vicky may have mentioned it, but I don't know who wants to take that one. Digital seals. Let's go,
I'm happy
Chris.
Chris.
to take it. Yep. Well, Vicky, what do you
Okay.
think of a digital seal
Okay.
in this context? Yeah.
So I mean, my imagination, it's obviously a seal that will secure those goods and hold the data for that shipment, and it will travel with those goods. So you can see actually the supply chain, as I say, from A to B. You can see that shipment moving. You know, you order something online at the moment. Not going to say certain large businesses that deliver your goods will obviously drop that parcel off, and you know when that's coming and who it's going to be delivered by. So that's how I envision that. Oh, my goods are coming from China. It's on this ship. That's where it is. It's gone through customs. It's got to my door.
In other words, it's like a digital version of a document folder. Yeah, that travels all the way along, and the big difference is that instead of it being in the cab of a truck somewhere on the Silk Road, it's it's available from start to finish. And I think you're right to draw the analogy with some of the consumer processes, which show the way for this, but which we sometimes almost take for granted because they're so established. And so, if that's large retailer you weren't talking about, to some extent is an integrated logistics and retail and wholesale business, and as well as being a provider of cloud services, and so for them it comes as second nature that the delivery process, the tracking, and everything else are integrated in one information flow that all of the participants can tap into. And so, in a way, that's what a digital, I would regard it as. It's a secure and encrypted and protected set of information that travels with a trade in the broadest sense.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Vicky. Apologies for throwing that one in between you, but yeah, I'd just like to thank you both for answering all those questions and for both presentations. It's such a fascinating topic, and it really is one which is rapidly developing as well. So we hope everyone has found that useful, and is one to keep an eye out over the coming months and possibly years to come. So we will be doing various future webinars on this topic and all the connotations and implications of it. So keep your eyes peeled for further future webinars. The Institute, of course, continues to be on hand to support businesses to trade compliantly during this ever-changing trade landscape, whether that's due to Brexit, climate change, or the war in Ukraine. Export.org.uk is where you can find more information about our services. Just a reminder that we will be sending all registrants a recording of today's webinar along with a copy of the slides that'll be with you by the end of the week. Please do get in touch if for any reason that email doesn't come through to your main inbox. As you leave, please do let us know what you thought of today's webinar and any suggestions for topics on future webinars by completing the exit survey. But for now, thank you for joining us. Thank you again to Chris and Vicky, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. But for now, thank you and goodbye.